Welcome to another Holly Bridges Autism podcast. It's been a while since the last one. Today, I am very, very, very excited to introduce you to my very dear friend, Travis Monson. Travis, I met last year at Asperger Experts. He was co-presenting with a wonderful team there, and I was so impressed with the level of intelligence and sophistication that was shared with the group, and it was unlike anything else I'd seen with autism and autism services, Asperger's. It's very different what they're doing, and very exciting and worth a listen. Travis has just written a book as part of the Asperger Experts, 7 Easy Ways to Motivate Someone with Asperger's. And he is also, and I will read, the Head of Research and Development and Managing Partner at the Asperger Experts. His work primarily consists of coaching, research, running live workshops and seminars, writing books and developing new products. He is a self-professed hardcore psychology nerd, and he's known around the office as a walking encyclopedia. Travis is currently pursuing his degree in psychology and business administration. Following graduation, he will begin working towards his PhD. In the book, Travis talks about intrinsic motivation and how to inspire someone with Asperger's, which I think is really interesting and what we want to talk about today a lot. He also talks about growing up as my parents' worst nightmare. So on that note, we will introduce you to Travis, and he can tell us a little bit more about that. So welcome, Travis.
Thank you. Wow, that was quite an introduction. I don't know what else to say.
Probably a lot. You're a very interesting person. Do you want to give people an idea, first of all, maybe about the Asperger Experts and what they're about for people that don't know?
Absolutely. Yeah. Let's see what's the shortest way I can explain this. So Asperger Experts, officially we're a media publishing company, but really what we're about is we want to educate people about Asperger's. It's run by Danny Rady and myself. We both are diagnosed with Asperger's. And so I feel like we're able to bring an interesting perspective to the table, saying, hey, yes, we've read this in a book, but we've also lived it, so let us tell you a little bit about what it's like to live inside our heads and hopefully offer people another perspective. So we focus a lot on education. We also focus a lot on community and live events. And because people ask us sometimes, we are not therapists or medical doctors. We are supplemental to that, not a replacement for it. So yeah, I think overall it's just my dream job. I love being able to help people and talk to them, and it's been quite a journey. We've been around for about five years now. So.
And from what I've seen, it's a wonderful resource both for people on the spectrum and also their families who are often seeking something a little more than the traditional therapies. And you guys offer a perspective that's really rather unique.
Well, thank you. I like to think so.
Could you talk a little about the beginning of your book? You talk about your early life, and it's very interesting, and I think that's very much a part of what you guys bring to the table is your unique perspective. In the book, you talk a little bit about how you were as a younger child and some things that you went through, and I found it really powerful when I was at your weekend workshop for parents who are often really worried or troubled, or often there's a lot of rhetoric and there's not a lot of hope, and people get kind of quite lost. And your story was so compelling because you are doing what you're doing now, and it's so beautiful and it's successful, and yet that wasn't where you were. And it's really nice for people to see that gradation and that progress that we all have. But it's such an interesting story. I wondered if you could recap it a little.
Of course, yeah. Tell you a little bit about a crazy person I used to be. So yeah, I was first diagnosed with Asperger's when I was 12. At the time, I was sitting there in the therapist's office with my parents, and the therapist was actually just taking a few minutes to kind of tell me a little bit about my diagnosis. And this was the first I'd ever heard of it. He talked about poor social skills and executive functioning and sensory issues, anxiety and depression, on and on and on. Eventually, I just stopped listening. But, I remember he told my parents afterwards, and it kind of stuck in my head a little bit. He said, Travis may never be able to hold down a job, and he may never be able to live on his own. And he may never get married. He may never have any kind of long-lasting relationships of that kind. And that was really interesting for me. But I soon forgot about it. And anyway, as life went on, growing up, I think I was what many would have considered a parent's worst nightmare. I really put my parents through hell, which I've apologized to them for many a time. But the basic gist was that I was headstrong and defiant in the most extreme way imaginable. We almost every day we'd have some kind of disagreement, by which I mean like 2 to 4 hours of all-out war, where a window gets broken, the police get called. Eventually, I would just grab my backpack and run away. Then when I wasn't just melting down like that, I was completely at the other end of the spectrum. I was severely depressed, often suicidal. I was playing like video games 16 hours a day sometimes. When I wasn't playing video games, I was usually sleeping. Sometimes I'd sleep up to 16 hours a day. I was just failing in school. So my parents just tried every therapist you can think of, every medication, every treatment under the sun. None of it really helped me. So when I was 16, they put me into a residential treatment center for at-risk adolescents, and I lived there for an entire year. That was 8 hours a day of group and individual therapy. Very, very intense. But after that, I graduated the program, got to come home, and things were great for a couple of months. And then one thing led to another. My old habits kicked in, theirs followed suit, and my parents and I were just back to World War III every day. So they basically just sat me down and said, "Okay, Travis, we've tried everything we can think of. This just isn't working. You're still having these huge outbursts. You're pulling knives on people. We keep having to call the police. It's just, the status quo can't continue." So they basically told me that they were going to find me an apartment. I was 17 at the time, and they said they would help me out with rent until I was 18. After that, it was conditional on me either being in school or having a full-time job or both. And it was kind of a, good luck and Godspeed kind of a situation, which was, at the time, I've asked them about it years later. They said, "Yeah, we really thought you were going to crash and burn. There was no way you were going to succeed out there in the adult world. But the alternative was that you would stay at home and continue terrorizing our family," to use their words. And that, of course, wasn't okay. But it actually did end up working out. I kind of started to hit my turning point. I started to have little realizations here and there. I mean, things that I'm sure to you, Holly, would just seem just painfully obvious. Like, well, of course you're responsible for your own actions. But for me, that was like such a novel concept of like, whoa, I always used to blame mom and dad. And then, I remember one experience I had. I had a job at a college. It was one of my first jobs. I was on the painting crew there, and I had to wake up at 7 o'clock every morning. And I was not a morning person, and I was late a lot. And eventually my boss just said, "Hey, next time you're late, don't bother coming in." And a few days later, I was late again, and I lost my job. And that was one of many just wake up experiences that I had where I realized, whoa, maybe I am responsible for my own actions. And from there, it kind of led into, hey, if my actions influence the results I'm getting, then maybe I can do something to influence that a little bit. And I started really getting into psychology and some of the self-help world, and kind of just figuring out what's the recipe of life? What are the ingredients? How do you put them all together? Because other people are successful. I think they figured it out before. I think as Tony Robbins says, success leaves clues. And so that's what I went looking for, and I found them. And so little by little, like, things started to change. I watched a TED Talk every day just because, I'm a nerd, and I go hardcore about stuff. A couple of years later, I started working with Danny at Asperger Experts, and getting to tell people my story. And nowadays I'm married, and life is awesome. So.
It's such an interesting story. I think what struck me right at the beginning, so I wanted to pull you back to that just for a minute, because I think it matters so much, and it's so much a part of your book, is the person right at the beginning saying that you'll never amount to anything and you'll never get married, which you have done recently, et cetera, et cetera. How much did that impact your vision of who you could be?
I think for a long time, it really impacted me in a big way. And it wasn't just the therapist. I mean, that's kind of the most poignant example, but there were lots and lots of people that I think, they just had this belief about me. Travis is autistic. I am autistic. And that was a label I really internalized, and it kind of stuck in my head. And so it eventually it shifted from just being a diagnosis to almost becoming part of my identity. It's not just that I have Asperger's. For a while, it was, I am Asperger's. I can't make friends. I can't succeed in school. I can't get a job. I can't be happy. So I never really tried. I think unconsciously I was acting out that script that others had written for me. And it wasn't until years later that I had that realization that, you know what, my diagnosis is not a prescription for who I'm supposed to be. It's nothing more than just a framework for understanding myself. It's just a form of verbal shorthand that psychological medical community we made up just so we can talk to each other and understand whatever this thing is. And that's all I really see it as now. And from there, as I was going through my phase where it's like, I really want to figure this thing out and not be defined by it, I went out of my way to really overcome those deficits. It was like, okay, I lack social skills. Cool. I've got a brain. I can learn social skills. And I went and read every book on social skills and communication I could find. And it took a while, going from the kid who was so socially awkward he couldn't even hold a conversation with people to now being able to do this. And, it's really been kind of an interesting journey.
And that's the thing, isn't it? I see it as like a glass ceiling with autism. We just define it, we describe it, and then people think that that's all there is. But there's so much more. And I think it's so refreshing when people like you and Danny are doing the work that you do, because you're changing that paradigm so beautifully. And it's very, very necessary, because how are you supposed to grow if people don't think you can? You can't go past that. It takes an enormous amount of effort to go past that, whoever you are.
Oh yeah. I mean, whatever your situation, I think anytime you're kind of held down by this glass ceiling, somebody else has kind of set this is the limit for you. This is as far as you can go. I mean, I think I'm wired a little bit differently from most people, but usually my first response to that is, "Oh yeah," I was diagnosed with ODD. That was another something on my rap sheet, oppositional defiance. So I think it served me well in life. But
so, describe a little the workshops and the work that you guys do, and how. What kind of things you see for other people, and changes that you see come about by you introducing a much wider scope, and also you guys, like you've done with yourself, you ask for people to be very self-responsible. It's like you go, actually the bar's much higher than you thought it was, and now actually it's your job, which is a vastly different approach to what most people do. So it would be fun if you could kind of talk around that and what you see in the changes in other people, because it isn't just you. Lots of people are having these much more extraordinary lives than previously.
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah, it's kind of twofold, I think for initially hearing our stories, parents and the individuals with Asperger's that come to our workshops and we get to meet them in person. Usually almost across the board, the response is, wow, that wasn't supposed to be possible, but here you are. And then that little voice of like, well, maybe it's possible for me too. And, kind of the the beginnings of hope there. Beyond that, though, I think what we try and do is we offer people paradigm shifts. In my book on motivation, I talk about this a little bit, where for most people in most of the world, the traditional paradigm of motivation is carrots and sticks. It's rewards and punishments, and that, unfortunately, at least in my opinion, is a lot of what is used in the treatment of autism as well. It's, if you want a particular behavior, reward it. If you don't want it, punish it. And that's the idea. And that's how you train human beings, the same way you would train a dog. And we try and come in and say, okay, granted, motivation issues exist. If you can create external motivation, that can work. But what if you're wrong in some instance? And I think in most instances, it's not a 100% pure motivation issue. If you just create the right incentives, people will just, start making different decisions. A lot of times it's a capability issue. And that's what we ask people to look at is, could it be something in your environment as well? Could it, something in your emotional capacity? We talk a lot about an idea called defense mode, which is an idea where, psychologically, biologically, you are shut down. And so it's not that you are incapable of learning social skills. It's that part of your brain, to, I guess, put it overly simplistically, that part of your brain is shut down, and you can't. But you still have the nervous system. It's working. You can turn it back on. And it's little things like that where it's like, hey, you're not broken. It's just that. There's particular knowledge and skills you didn't have before, and now you do, and now you can, kind of start whacking at the roots instead of the leaves.
And I read recently, doing some research, I think it's quite new, but they found that the amygdala, which is the flight or fight center, very basically in the brain, literally overtakes, like physically gets bigger and overtakes the prefrontal cortex, which is your executive functioning and your sense of self and your images of yourself in the world. And it's like people on the spectrum are kind of stuck in that state where there's this really limbic dominance. So they can't access that ability so much. So it's not like it's not there. It's just waiting in the wings for everything to subside so that they can access it again. And it's such a paradigm shift to look at that. But I see from the work that I do just how real that is. And it's clearly what you guys see as well. And you help so many people that traditionally are beyond help, in the sense that, if you can't deal with a kid by about he's 7 or 10, then there's not much else you can do, is there? But it's not true.
No, I mean, people have asked me that before, like, well, is there any hope in my situation? Do you really think my situation is unique and special? And it is, obviously. But as far as a blanket statement would go, to date, I've never told anybody, no, you are beyond help. I've seen a lot of people who don't want to be helped. And so I guess in that sense, they can't be. But I don't foresee ever in a point in my career saying to someone, you absolutely cannot be helped, because to me, that would mean that we have tried literally everything under the sun, known and unknown, and none of it's worked. And we've tried it all to the umpteenth degree, and none of it works still. And that's the point at which we say, all right, empirically, we can say you can't be helped. I don't know of anyone who meets that description. So, at least in the world of autism, I would say I want to believe there's always hope. But, yeah.
So can you talk a little bit more about your book then and what it can offer people?
Absolutely. Yeah. So my book primarily focuses on motivation. We introduce our core concept of defense mode there at the beginning, and then the rest of the book goes into, of course, the 7 easy ways, and those 7 ways are broken up into 3 different categories, where the 3 ingredients for motivation to exist, and we make a distinction between intrinsic and extrinsic. Extrinsic meaning like the carrots and the sticks, the rewards and punishments. Intrinsic meaning a point where you chose it for yourself, and that's the kind of motivation we really prefer in most instances, because that's the kind of motivation that can become self-sustaining. Extrinsic can't. There will always be a point of diminishing returns where You have to find a bigger stick or a sweeter carrot in order to get that same result, because people adapt to it, right? Intrinsic motivation, on the other hand, it's slow. It takes a buildup. It's an exponential growth curve, but once you can hit that tipping point, it's very, very powerful. So the three ingredients of intrinsic motivation are: first, capability. And that's broken into a few different parts. First, there is the personal capability, meaning, like, do you understand how to do the thing you're being asked? Do you have emotional capacity? Is your nervous system online? On and on. It's a very long list. Then of course there's things like third person capability. Are there situations like, hey, maybe the thing you're trying to motivate is homework, but your son has a friend who's always pressuring him to just, slough off the homework and not do that. That's to an extent a capability block, because he's having to swim upstream. And then there's, of course, environmental capabilities. If we go back to homework, is there clutter everywhere, and there's TV and 17 and a half small children running around, and you just can't focus. That's an environmental block, a lot of things like that. So capability is the first thing we address, and there's a few chapters on that, how to find those blocks and address and hopefully eliminate them. After that, we get into belief, which is where you get kind of into the fun psychology of not just you have to be capable of doing it, but you have to believe it too, because otherwise it amounts to the same thing. If you believe you can't do it, you're probably right. And then we also get into the belief of for you as the motivator, like you're the parent, do I believe in my child? Do I believe that they can do this? Because otherwise you're communicating that to them, whether you realize it or not. Hey, yeah, go give it a try, but in the back of your head, they're totally going to crash and burn. They feel that, and then the last one, of course, is what most people think of when they think of motivation, and that's desire. And that's where having a genuine internal reason to do it for yourself. So I guess to speak to your question directly, overall, I think what my book offers is a break from the traditional paradigm of motivation, is saying, hey, we're not just talking about desire here. That's what most books you're going to read on motivation are about. It's getting to, that iceberg that's underneath the surface, and saying, hey, if you can address this is really the big issue. If you can get the capability, if you can get the belief, the desire is kind of the last little 10% to get you over the hump. And I've seen people implement the formula, and it's very powerful, and obviously very based in research. I'm not that smart to come up with all that myself, but it's. Yeah.
You're very good at sharing it, though, and making it simple enough for people so they can access it. Within what you were just saying, I think it'll be interesting for people if I blatantly ask you, what's your opinion of applied behavior analysis? Because it, as an evidence-based program or therapy, it's the go-to for most people. If people are asked what they should do when their kid's young, that's the one that's on offer, and it's the one that insurance pays for, etc., and is government funded, often here at least, in Australia. What's your opinion of it and its usefulness? I'd be quite interested to know.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this at length on other occasions, but I can say it again here. So I think ABA has its place. It's basically, for those of you that aren't familiar with ABA, like you said, applied behavioral analysis, but really it's just a fancy form of operant conditioning, meaning carrots and sticks. It's the same way you would train a rat or a dog. At its core, it's you reward the dog with a treat. You yell at it if it's being bad, and that's how you condition and certain behaviors. And the idea is that you can do that same thing with a human being, and to an extent, it's absolutely true. I mean, if you're trying to potty train your toddler, and you say you get a piece of chocolate every time you go sit on the toilet, she's gonna start sitting on the toilet more consistently. Same thing with adults. Your boss says, hey, next time you turn in a late report, you're fired on the spot. You're gonna think twice about turning it in late. There's things like that where we can't deny that it works, and I think that is where a lot of the evidence-based stuff comes from. Is, yeah, to a certain extent, if you're using operant conditioning, you're going to get results. You just will. But I think what ABA really overlooks is a lot of what my book talks about. It's the capability issue. So if you imagine a situation, I'm an ABA practitioner. I come in, I'm trying to work with someone, let's say I'm trying to get them to brush their teeth, and so I'm trying to offer certain rewards or punishments if they don't, or, whatever it is I'm trying to do, completely overlooking the fact that they are emotionally overwhelmed and the bristles really hurt their teeth and it's a sensory issue. There's all these things under the surface where brushing their teeth is a really, really painful experience. It's the same way if, let's say, I set some math homework in front of you, and you have no idea how to do this math homework. Maybe it's calculus. You've never even taken the class, and I can offer all the rewards and punishments in the world. I can threaten to kill you, put a gun to your head, or offer you $1 million. That math homework still isn't going to get done because there's deeper issues. And to a certain extent, I'm kind of disrespecting you and your intelligence by just assuming, if I just motivate you, obviously the reason you're choosing not to do this math homework is because you just didn't feel like it. And so I need to come in and introduce external things so that then you'll feel like it, instead of recognizing, hey, maybe you're a human being with feelings, and maybe there's a deeper process we need to go through here. So that's the abbreviated version. But I would also be curious what your thoughts are, since you're quite the expert.
I'm always interested more in what families think. So I quite like reading what people on your Facebook page say. Some people are quite vitriolic. I had a mum recently. I did a talk, and I was more probably strident than I normally am about things like that. And she came up afterwards and she said, look, I love what you were saying, and it's absolutely right, but also I do ABA professionally, but also I have a small child on the spectrum, and I need him to be safe and not run across the road. And I need him to be able to do things, so I employ it. And I thought that was really useful because it's, as you're saying, everything has its place. Just when it's overemphasized to the point that, which is what I was asking you before, that glass ceiling, if you don't think that person's capable of more and you treat them like that, it's like you're giving them something on the one hand and then just taking it away again. And you want to empower people as much as you can, and you have to broaden your idea of what the autism spectrum can be. Otherwise it can be very limiting, and I think sometimes it can be a little rough. I think it can be a bit much.
Yeah, I mean, I think with ABA, it's this quote's been attributed to different people, Mark Twain, Abraham Maslow, but the basic gist is, to a man with a hammer, every problem looks like a nail, and I think that's what people kind of latched onto with operant conditioning. That's the hammer, and they found it works really well for nails, and then they say, well, what else could it work with? And they start taking it into other situations where it doesn't belong, like open heart surgery. It's a much more delicate thing, but they're going in there with the hammer. It has to work, So I agree. It has its place, but yeah, when you limit someone with that glass ceiling and you smash them down with the hammer, you can do more harm than good.
I think we've also really upgraded we're really getting there now with our understanding of neurophysiology and biology, the interrelationship of the brain and the body, so that we're just getting more sophisticated with how we think about those things. And, that hammer is quite outdated now in a lot of ways. Oh, yeah. So I feel like there's a lot of catching up to do We've been trained in a certain way when there is so much more available to us now, but it requires that paradigm shift. And it requires seeing a little bit more beauty about what people on the spectrum offer that you might not understand, because and I'm not really into neurotypical kind of stuff like that so much, but I think a lot of people bring such interesting ideas to fruition when they feel good, people on the spectrum, and we often don't know how to access that. Like Kanner and Asperger a long time ago had special abilities at the top of their list when they were discussing autism, but that seems to have gone by the by. And when you remember the person's amazing and how you might draw that out of them, I think you get a lot further with people.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's been well documented actually for years and years. I think it was, I want to say 64. This guy named Robert Rosenthal, he did a study, went into a school in San Francisco, and basically he found that when you test all the kids and then you just pick names out of a hat, basically you don't even look at their scores, just random kids, and then you go and tell their teachers, hey, these kids are special, they're exceptional. Asperger's actually is the word he used. And then he came back at the end of the school year, and he tested everybody again. And lo and behold, the kids, he lied, and he said they're special without knowing what their scores were. They actually did have huge increases in their scores compared to all the rest of their peers. Believing they were special made it so. And to me, that's a really powerful thing for teachers, parents, therapists, is that your beliefs, your expectations of those that you work with actually do have a powerful effect on them, whether you're explicitly stating them or not. And they can feel that from you. If you believe they can rise to the occasion, it's just a matter of time and capability, and removing some of those capability blocks so they don't have to swim upstream anymore, that they're totally capable of doing it. Chances are good they're going to rise to that occasion. If you believe that the reason they can't swim is because of who they are as a person, then they're probably going to stay stuck.
And this is what you guys do so well, is broaden that so beautifully. And you're speaking from experience, which I think is just so valuable. So what's next on the agenda for you? You're finishing your degree and you're going to do a PhD. What are some of your future visions for your work?
Oh gosh, that's a very long list. Danny and I have long brainstorming conversations about taking over the world. Not really. There's I'm working on my second book right now. It's on communication. There's some new courses we're working on bringing out. There's a retreat center we want to do, because we found that the best way to really work with people is to change their environment. And so if we can create a space where people can come and just hang out and just be, not in like a therapeutic sense, just in a, hey, this is a safe space to hang out and connect with your people. And so that's something we're really excited about building. And working towards my PhD. Obviously, it's a long road. There's a couple other businesses I'm helping start up right now that are kind of along the same lines of just helping people and coaching them, not with Asperger's specifically. But it's I don't know, there's a lot of itches I want to scratch, so hopefully I get to them all.
Travis, thank you for talking to us today. It's so interesting and useful.
My pleasure.
If they want to know more about your work, where are they going to find you?
So you can email me personally at travis@aspergerexperts.com. It's just my first name, Travis, at aspergerexperts.com. If you want to go on our website, click on courses, scroll down, you can find my book there, along with a lot of our other courses. You can also just check out our website generally. We've got a lot of cool things going on, videos, different things you can check out, and hopefully you find something there that's useful to you.
Well, I'm getting to see you soon because we're doing a workshop in Boston, so I'm thrilled. So I'll put
you all should come and see Holly in Boston, because she's amazing and she will change your life. Because she changed my life. I mean, I sat down, had a session with you for like 20 minutes. I still use those techniques you taught me, by the way.
Really?
They're just fantastic.
I'm glad. Excellent. Well, we'll talk about that some more in Boston, and continue to conquer the world.
All right. One person at a time, I guess.
Sorry?
One person at a time, I guess. We'll help some people.
Well, conquer is just such a wrong word, isn't it? It's quite the opposite. It's taking the lid off and letting it flourish, I think.
Yeah, I think if we just kind of get out of people's way, that's what I tell my coaching clients all the time. I'm like, I take it very literally. I'm a coach. I'm on the sidelines. You're playing on the field. You get to take credit for all the victories. I
was winding up, but now I can't help saying this as well.
I'm sorry.
No, it's my fault. But it's interesting. You get out of the way. You don't matter. It's the opposite to me of ABA in that sense, where it's so, if I'm being blunt, it's very dictatorial in that sense of you know what the person needs and you tell them and you define what they need to learn.
Yeah, I make the decision for them.
Just getting right out of the way and see that person gets self-directive and they get in touch with themselves and they stay connected and they keep flourishing and they get their own centrifugal force. You then have a human being that can go and live independently, get married, have a wonderful life and contribute to society in a way that you would never imagine otherwise. And that's the beauty. So Conquer the World's totally the opposite. And I think we're just in such a big change in a whole evolutionary sense of what it means to empower people and what power means, really.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'll rein myself in here. That's a very deep philosophical rabbit hole we could go down. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
Talk to you again soon.
Yes, please. Have a good night.
See ya.
Bye.
You too.